today, everyone. I'm Allison Rogers. I am the editor here at Collision Repair Magazine. You're watching another Open Dialogue webinar session, and today we're talking about electric vehicles. The two simple words have the power to strike fear, confusion, a lot of different emotions in people all across the world. We're here today to answer questions, conquer any topics that people might have confusion about, talk about where we can get education on electric vehicles, and just the reality of the electrification of the Canadian fleet. So we're here today with David Giles. He's the co-founder of AllEV Canada, and Steve Fletcher, the managing director of Automotive Recyclers of Canada, both of whom hold plenty of knowledge in how Canada is conquering the EV wave, how industries are going to respond to it. Steve's got a lot of research on the recycler front that's ongoing. David has been working with electric vehicles since 2004, or high voltage vehicles rather, since 2004. So I could tell you about them, but let's let them tell you about themselves. So starting with David, tell us a little bit about your experience in the automotive industry overall and where you started and how you got to where you are today.
Thank you. I'm Dave Giles I'm the training and development manager at AllEV Canada. I've been involved with high voltage electric hybrid vehicles since 2004. Pretty much the first vehicle I got involved with was the 2004 Prius I rented from Hertz, brought it home and basically dismantled it, learned how it worked. I've been doing training courses for 11 years with the community college in Nova Scotia, developing curriculum, training aids in around hybrid electric vehicles. I'm a Red Seal technician. I'm involved with the collision industry, truck and transport industry, as well as the automotive industry, mostly in post-journey person training. So I do a lot of training for industry through ICAR, associations, and so on, mostly on advanced vehicle systems, and of course, hybrid electric vehicles and PHEV vehicles, and all these wonderful terms that are out there are all fall under that category. So, I've been involved with the automotive industry for many years, and the passion is electric vehicles. I jumped ship with the community college back in 2019, where I basically approached a partner of mine, and we created AllEV Canada, and from there, AllEV Canada has been acquired by the Steel Auto Group, and I continue to work with them for training and development of electric vehicles within Canada.
Yeah, a lot of background there working with electric vehicles. I remember when we first started talking and you told me 2004, my jaw hit the floor. That's a long time to be working on EVs. And Steve, working with auto recyclers, you've been in the sector for a long time, advocating for just the betterment of the automotive recycling industry. Tell us about your experience with EVs as well as just with the general recycling and your advocacy there.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Steve Fletcher, and I'm the managing director of the Auto Recyclers of Canada Association. So we have 350 certified audited recyclers in all parts of Canada, basically in the business of parts reselling. So we buy end-of-life vehicles, oftentimes total loss vehicles, break them up into parts and materials, and do it in an environmentally responsible manner. So EVs got on our horizon maybe 3-4 years ago. More and more members were getting them into their inventory and asking a lot of questions about what are these things, what do we do with them all? And over the last 2 to 3 years, ARC's been more involved in the policy development and just sort of scanning what's going on globally, North American, Canadian, in terms of the entire ecosystem of electric vehicles. So a lot of time and effort spent on getting people into EVs, and now they're looking at the infrastructure to charge. There's some really good true end-of-life battery recycling stories in Canada, but there's a whole aftermarket in between that that the auto recyclers sit in, handling those end-of-life vehicles, but also making sure that our customers, mechanical collision repairers, have the parts to do the fixing. So they're starting to come in more and more, and just need to be in a number of places. And our strategy right now is just to kind of hold up our hands, say, we're auto recyclers. This is what we do with cars. And this is where the gaps that exist now in terms of understanding that electrification and just, what role can we play, and what role can we play in educating people above us, below us, and within the sector. So very exciting time, a lot of moving parts. and recognition that electrification is a big business.
Perfect segue into our next question. So this is for Steve. You mentioned that, I mean, electric vehicles really came on the radar about 3-4 years ago for the recyclers as they started to reach their end of life, those first ones that were sold out. But 2 words, high voltage, they really do have the power to strike fear into members of the automotive aftermarket. But Steve, what have you seen from auto recyclers? Are they really gung-ho to get going on this, or is it more of just a, oh, what do we do?
Definitely gung-ho in that they want to stay in business. And, vehicles are continuing to change, unibody, new materials. And we as recyclers kind of see these being built, going on the road, getting in accidents, needing to be fixed. And so it's a very gradual process for us. It's not like we only process 10, 15-year-old cars. We're processing 2021 vehicles right now. So it first started as a bit of a trickle, and that allowed you to, all our guys are car guys. They get a car in, they're like David, and they want to tear it apart, understand it, figure out what makes it work. And then they start thinking about the business. How is this going to change how I do things? And that battery is really a game changer from the dismantling side, and mainly from a safety perspective. They're big, they're very heavy, a lot of voltage that you need to be careful around. And that's been sort of the point for us in terms of understanding it for members, just making sure that they're safe, their employees are safe, they can remove the battery from the vehicle, and then start to do the magic that they do with making sure that they can find the part streams and the material streams on these new vehicles. But they're coming in now in larger and larger quantities, so more and more members are having to be made aware of the problems and opportunities. And that's kind of where we are now. This will change the industry, but for the most part, auto recyclers are raring to go, but still trying to find a lot of information. Where do you sell these things? How do you do things properly? And we're trying to fill those gaps by having these sorts of conversations with people.
Absolutely. So the desire is there. It's just a matter of the collaboration and the research in order to get to a point where we understand what the path is. And David, as an expert on EV, I mean, I don't want to say the word expert if you're not going to pick it yourself, but I've seen on your LinkedIn, you're an EV expert. So would you say as an EV expert, are these fears warranted, the fears that collision repairers, recyclers, or anyone has of dealing with these high voltage vehicles?
Well, they should definitely have the insight that, yes, high voltage is real. It is, they are dangerous at the point when they're handling vehicles that they might not know anything about. So when you're touching high voltage systems, there is a fear amongst many technicians, as well as even first responders responding to an accident. I do a lot of first responders training around electric vehicles and how do they handle them at accident, even going to a call, even with police and everybody. It's a big concern, even though they might not be dealing with a damaged vehicle in accident, but even just from a vehicle being pulled over. But mostly on damaged vehicles, there is that fear, there is the intimidation that these are high voltage vehicles. Electricity is real. So the thing is, it really does come down to training, following procedures. I'm an expert witness with the courts, the Supreme Court in automotive, and a couple of the cases I worked on basically followed around carelessness. So same applies with gas or electric vehicles. If you're repairing them and you're not following procedures, or you're not being safe, then accidents will happen. But saying that, if you are following procedures and you're working with OE information and training and proper PPE and proper equipment, these are no different than any other vehicle. No different than gasoline vehicles. Handling gas tanks and using a torch to cut a gas tank off is pretty dangerous. But same as high voltage systems and touching battery terminals in a high voltage battery that has like 400, 600, 800 volts in it, could be fatal. So same thing. It's awareness. It's talking about how do we get technicians and those servicing vehicles, whether a recycler, dismantlers, service technicians, collision technicians, or even automotive service technicians dealing with these vehicles. And it comes down to training, information, proper tooling, and of course the big one is safety. So yeah, these are big things that that I get asked all the time. I've dealt with over 500 plus electric vehicles through our shops and so on, and you know, everyone always asks, like, you know, how do you handle them? How do you do this? What equipment do I need? What kind of you know, information do I need in order to service these vehicles or even repair these vehicles? So yeah, we're seeing more and more of this, and electric cars are coming on faster and stronger than ever with gas prices rising, and the availability of the vehicles is becoming more and more. We're going to see more and more of these vehicles on the road.
Yeah, I know that just writing about the recalls and stuff that we see in news wise about electric vehicles, there's been a lot of battery fire related recalls lately. I know that some collision repairs that I spoke to have concerns that the EV is just going to burst into flames in my shop. Is that a real concern? Are fires like an actual concern to be worried about, or is the training, the OE, what you're saying, enough to bolster you to not have to worry about that?
Well, to say that whether gas or electric vehicles, fire is always a risk, especially when repairing collision or dismantling, just because the vehicle is possibly beyond OE specifications, depending on the type of damage. So safety becomes the foremost thing there. Going to the recalls with the bolts and stuff like that and battery fires, like, yeah, you have to put in perspective. You know, every year there's for every 100,000 gas-powered vehicles, there's about 1,600 gas fires, or sorry, gas vehicle fires, whereas 100,000 electric vehicles, there's about 25. So the risk is very, very low, a lot lower than a gasoline-powered vehicle. To burst into flames just sitting there it'd be like winning the lottery. Like, you know, it's so rare. Usually something has to be happening. Like, you know, if you're charging a vehicle and something happens within the vehicle. In fact, with the bolt recalls, it wasn't the batteries themselves that were the problem. It was the construction and how they were put together and the issues with inside the module itself. But the batteries themselves were not the issue. And that's what a lot of people don't understand. The batteries themselves are very stable. They're very reliable. They work very well. But sometimes it comes down to, you know, how they're put together. And that's where the recall came about. So to mitigate any kind of risks, the OE just basically said, do not park them inside. If you're charging them, charge them outside. It just totally takes away any risk to the manufacturer until they replace the batteries. And the bonus is with that recall is that brand new batteries with brand new warranties with more range on the vehicle. So it's kind of a bonus to somebody that owns, you know, a Bolt, for example. They get that extra little incentive from the OE because of the inconvenience. But saying that, once again, information is critical, training is critical, and so on. So yeah.
Absolutely. We've got from Jeff Haltrecht here from Call to Recycle. He's saying, thank you, David, for the clear and factual comments on lack of fire risk. I think there's a lot of miscommunication in the industry circulating with that. So when we spoke and I heard that for the first time too, it was, again, I was shocked too, because I've heard everything opposite. So again, thank you. But yeah, you mentioned the electrification of the fleet and their EVs are coming. Realistically, the Canadian government has a goal of ending ICE, internal combustion engine new vehicle sales by 2035. Do you see this as a realistic goal?
Well, I see in electrification of vehicles, it's coming. There's no question. Two things drive electric vehicle or any kind of consumer products to go to market is one, the consumer themselves. Demand, you know, they see gas prices rising, they want alternatives. If the electric vehicles are there, they have the range, they have the infrastructures there, the incentives for rebates on the vehicles. Obviously, this will continue to, you know, boost the EV market, as well as government putting restrictions on sales of electric or on gasoline powered vehicles. So 2035, you know, we don't know, but I can definitely say that we're going to probably see at least, you know, probably 4 out of every 10 vehicles will start becoming electric. You know, the manufacturers are going to start pushing more and more electrics, and they're already doing it now. And why? Because consumers are looking for them. People are pre-ordering vehicles. They're ordering vehicles online, not even seeing them and ordering them in. So we're seeing more and more of this, and it might happen even faster than we can anticipate. So that's why our industry needs to be ready. Right now, I deal with a lot of the community colleges within Canada, and they're ramping up. They want to be ready. They want to be the first out of the gate, preparing technicians, preparing the industry for vehicles, because it's coming. So when you have education centers doing it, you have the OEs doing it, you have consumers looking for it. It's a perfect recipe. So I can see them maybe even being a little more aggressive than 30 or 2035. But we don't know, but I can definitely predict we're going to see a lot more electric vehicles on our road in the next 2 to 3 years.
So on that note, when do you think a collision repair center would find it realistic to see more EVs in their base than they would be seeing ICE vehicles?
I think a lot of collision centers are seeing more depending on where they're located, like, larger metropolitan cities and that, where there's a lot more density, a lot more vehicles. But the unique thing about electric vehicles, a lot of these vehicles are usually a higher end scale type vehicles. I'm not talking about Teslas, but even like the Bolts and Leafs and Konas and all these other manufactured vehicles, they usually have very good ADAS systems on them. So, so they have a lot of this collision avoidance system, lane keep, backup cameras, sonar sensors, radar systems. So, they're trying to mitigate the amount of, collision damage on these vehicles. Minor collisions and that will still exist. Damages like that will still exist. And same as, full vehicle where the vehicle cannot control itself, or somebody else runs into it, could be a total loss on it. But collision centers, I would say, should be ready now. Best part, I'm in Atlantic Canada. We're in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and we have actually a booming market on electric vehicles right now. It's like they're just constantly always chatter around it. Media's all over it. So we're in Halifax, we're in Nova Scotia, and looking across Canada at the bigger centers where there's more density population, I think collision centers should be getting ready for it now, rather than, be proactive, not reactive, and getting prepared for electric vehicles.
Yeah, absolutely. You make a key point there. I mean, being in Halifax and witnessing that, I mean, people in Saskatchewan, rural Saskatchewan, might not be seeing these EVs yet, but proactive, not reactive. You want to be ready for the curve, because we know that everyone's pushing them. And Steve, for naturally with the recycling line of business, that shift may come a bit later, but I mean, recyclers could be seeing EVs as soon as like tomorrow. They're already seeing them. So EVs are still on the roads today. They're still getting in accidents, and they're still becoming write-offs, which we will get to later. We want to talk about the increased write-offs, but there's vehicles there for the taking for recyclers. How do you see recyclers approaching these vehicles now at auctions, and when do you think it'll kind of become second nature for them?
Sure. As much as we're in the end of life vehicle business, that does encompass total loss vehicles. And those tend to be much more attractive to the ARC membership. We tend not to be looking at the scrap value of vehicles. So members are deep into it now. And it's a very engaging process where you're trying to figure out, what is the supply of this part, this vehicle, versus what is the demand look like. And the big change in these vehicles is the drivetrain. So motor and transmissions are the #1 and #2 seller for virtually every auto recycler in North America. So this changing drivetrain, fewer moving parts, smaller, is going to have an impact. And that's one of the uncertainties that we do need to figure out. But it is very much an organic process of looking at requests. Do I have that part? Boy, I just had 10 requests for that and I'm out of stock on it. I need to up my game in terms of valuing that part when I'm going to auction and bidding on the vehicles. Not all members are sort of actively engaged in trying to find EVs. There's still that, I'm afraid of them, I don't understand them, I don't have the training for it all. But those are gradually falling by the wayside as more and more of those are showing up and the requests are coming through. And you see the vehicles that are coming on the road and the incentives and the commitments. that you really start to build your business 10 years out. But for the progressive ones, it's here now, and they're actively trying to figure it out.
So there's companies keenly interested in reaping the rewards of EV battery materials. I know we've had previous conversations alongside the release of Canadian Auto Recyclers, which we'll talk about later too. But I know we've had conversations about different companies seeking magnets in vehicles, et cetera. There's a lot of different components in the EV battery itself. So how many new materials are there for the taking in salvaging these vehicles and in processing them for scrap?
Yeah, so EVs generally are much heavier than its comparable ICE vehicle. The battery itself takes up a lot of that weight and also the value, but just the structure required to move that safely down the road. At the same time, this is really electrification is a greenhouse gas minimization strategy by the governments and the OEMs. So they are looking at lightweighting wherever they can. And oftentimes lightweighting means more aluminum. Certainly there's a lot more copper, a lot more non-ferrous metals built into those vehicles. But the battery itself is really substantially different than a traditional lead acid battery. That's really a commodity of lead. And so there's a lot of new types of players coming in seeking batteries and seeking information on the flow of batteries and how we manage things. So it's sort of the new players, almost new industries coming to us and saying, what do you guys do? How do you guys operate? How do you generate data? What are you doing with these things now? And that's what we spend an inordinate amount of our time is sort of addressing those issues at the industry level, and at the individual company looking for supplies. And the earth magnets that are heavily into the motors of these things, is not something that would be on our radar screen to understand what they are, let alone even pronounce some of the metallic names for them. But now we're having companies coming to us and saying, the motors that you have in a traditional vehicle, might have a couple of grams of these materials in it, and we as a nation, as a Western economy, need to recover those because right now they are processed heavily outside in the Far East. But some of these new vehicles, the drivetrains, have like 5 pounds of these materials in there, and you can't leave that in the vehicle. One, because you're giving away a resource, but two, it's very difficult to process sort of further down the road. So basically everything around the car is still a car that we understand, collision repairers understand. There is a lot more digitization and electronics to it all, but we've been seeing that over time anyways. But the battery is that big thing that entire industries want to understand. How do I get access to that? Because that plays into the overall strategy of how do I build batteries in Canada, and therefore how do I assemble EVs in Canada. Once you start talking about driving those industries, you have the attention of some very important departments and people and organizations within Canada, just to make sure that the dialogue and the collaboration is happening.
Very interesting points there. I mean, I know that I'm hearing things like all these non-ferrous metals and all exciting things in there. And then there's also U-pull yards in recycling. So how does an increase in EVs translate into U-pull yard business for recyclers?
Well, that's probably a ways off. Again, these vehicles are going to be deemed to be high valued assets. That you're not in a U-pull situation. Oftentimes people go in, create a little bit of damage when they're going after that small part that they want. So while some of our members have U-pull operations, it tends to be a lot older model that somebody is looking at a do-it-yourself repair. So these vehicles, they're probably not going to allow them to kind of pick and choose. There is a growing do-it-yourself market on electric vehicles, but it's actually converting ICE vehicles into electric vehicles, sort of harnessing the style and the familiarity of those older vehicles, but putting a modern drivetrain, no stopping at a gas station, and those sorts of things. So that's the type of do-it-yourself market that we're seeing almost come from nowhere, and it's quite exciting. And you're again, it's the type of product you can look overseas, look at Europe, look at Korea, and see how they're treating the industry, nurturing the industry, and all these things developing. And we get to bring those back to Canada to say, hey, we can do this too. You know, who do we talk to? How do we encourage this sort of dialogue?
Yeah, like all your points on collaboration you were saying there at the beginning. I mean, it's not just collaboration amid Canada or even provincial or territorial. It's global. Everyone is dealing with this shift. So it's just interesting to have those conversations. And I know you had a webinar with featuring Canada, and there was a lot of international conversation that I had afterwards with people, and it was just everyone's so impressed with things that are happening across the board. So to our write-off question. Oh, sorry. Did someone want to? I feel like I'm interrupting. If there's a tangent you want to go on. Anyway, so back to the vehicle write-off situation. The implications of an electrified fleet in Canada also raise a lot of questions about the number of vehicle write-offs. Plenty of OEMs today have really strict requirements on what parts, repairing parts, replacing parts when it comes to ADAS technology, and EVs will obviously have a lot of that technology. So David, have you heard concerns that the vehicle electrification is going to prompt more total losses?
Well, this is a very interesting topic. I don't know if we have enough time in this this episode to go through it all, but it is really a ripple effect. It goes right from the type of damage on a vehicle, how it's analyzed, who's appraising the vehicle, information available about the vehicle, parts availability for the vehicle. These are all big factors that I've been hearing about, been seeing. Essentially, like I watch some of these car part and some of the auctions out there, like Impact and stuff like that. And when you see these auctions, you see the cars that are going. About a year and a half ago, there wasn't very many recyclers going after these vehicles, hence their high dollar value on a salvage title vehicle or a total loss vehicle. And mostly we were watching a lot of do-it-yourselfers, as Steve mentioned, we're grabbing these vehicles and pulling them. And they were like, total loss vehicles were in the tens of thousands of dollars for a total loss vehicle that can never go back on the road again. But they're buying them for their motors and the batteries with dreams to put them into restored vehicles and make them electric. And then the dynamic comes back is that it's more complex, more complicated. Do-it-yourselfers, these vehicles are very technical. They have a lot of integration, especially with their networks and communication. As you mentioned, ADAS plays a role in how even the vehicles function. So we're seeing now the cars themselves, what a lot of recyclers like is the body panels, the doors, the fenders, the hoods, the glass. Not so much maybe the batteries. Right now, batteries are probably being purchased a lot for research, for second storage, off-grid storage, things like that. But eventually that's gonna go away. And the batteries, because right now most batteries on electric vehicles have massive warranties on them, 8-10 years, 160,000+ kilometers. So somebody wearing out a battery on their 2018-17 vehicle is probably not going to be very likely because it's still covered under warranty. So really the high volume or the high dollar items still come from the regular parts on the vehicle. So if a collision shop receives a vehicle, for example, and I just know about this one vehicle that we were talking, it was about 6 months before the customer actually got his vehicle back. And it wasn't because they couldn't fix it, they didn't know what to do. It was the parts availability. The recyclers didn't have the parts that they were required, and the used side knew was back ordered. So now that car sits. Now you got rental fees, the insurers, not looking, that promising. It's not the shop's fault, and eventually the insurer just basically does the vehicle, sends it to auction and whatnot. So it creates a ripple effect, because once that vehicle has been seen as a loss, a total loss, write-off, or gets basically paid out, those premiums go back to the customers. And now these electric vehicles or any vehicle that's having trouble getting parts like that, their insurance premiums go up because there's more seen that they're being, sent right to auction. We've acquired a couple of vehicles in our early days of AllEV that, they were total loss vehicles, salvage title vehicles, and they had minimal damage on them. And it's unfortunate that these cars had wound up in their situation. I actually talked to the owner of one of the cars we acquired, and I contacted him in Ontario, and he was very upset that they actually they lost the vehicle was basically seen as a total loss when he drove it home from the accident. And it was just because it took so long to be able to get the parts for the car, the insurance company decided to write the vehicle off. So it goes back to educating appraisers. Now we're seeing more, like Steve says, there's more and more of these cars going into the recycler yards. I mean, not as total, basket cases in some cases. There's a lot of good parts on them. I saw one of the questions come up in the comments there about, new to use. It's no different than gas or electric vehicles. It's up to the insurer. OE will always have, basically must meet certain requirements, must meet certain parameters on any part that goes on a vehicle for repair, especially if warranty is still applicable to that vehicle. But used parts in some cases to get that car back on the road quicker, faster. Part match is perfect because they are off an OE vehicle, not using an aftermarket part. So there's a lot of benefits to these cars, at their end of life, or even at a point when they've been damaged and they go to a recycler to get repaired because those parts are now available. So it's a great model. But like I said, it's like I talked to the appraisers down here, the president of the Appraiser Association down here, and they were, they're struggling because they're seeing these cars. They're not sure. What about the batteries? Biggest question is every time a car is involved in a collision or an accident, what about the battery? And that's a big unknown. So what happens with the unknown, to mitigate any kind of liability later on, they total loss the vehicle. So I always say, it's like, do you replace your iPhone every time you drop it on the ground? So these batteries within the cases of the vehicle are very well protected. They're designed to take impacts. In fact, a lot of them are structural to the vehicle. So the damage within a vehicle, I've seen some batteries that have been heavily damaged, and they didn't burst into flames. In fact, I talked to a gentleman in Munich, Germany, and they recycle batteries, and even a battery fire that may happen within a battery at a collision doesn't burn the entire battery. And even a lot of the material still in a burnt battery is recyclable, especially the lithium and graphite. So these materials are still recyclable, even in a vehicle that looks like it's fire damage or total loss, in a sense, as severely damaged, water damage. All these materials are totally recoverable, recyclable, and reusable, which is the name of the game. So rather than going into landfills or sitting by the wayside, they can be recycled very easily. So so we're going to see. I think it's going to happen in the beginning. Total losses definitely were a big concern writing off the vehicle, but now as we're getting more and more into it, there's more information. Collision repair shops are getting better at repairing these vehicles. They're realizing there's not a lot of difference, some safety aspects that they have to learn. Once they do that, they follow OE procedures. And one of them say it's no different than a regular gasoline powered vehicle. Like the Kona is really the sister of the Kona is the EV Kona, the doors, the fenders, the hoods, they're all the same as the counterpart vehicle. And there is oddball vehicles out there like, Teslas, and they're unique in their sense, but most cases, the vehicles are out there are regular cars, they, other than their electric powertrain. So, and I think insurers are starting to see that more and more now. And you're seeing more and more of these cars getting fixed. And of course, availability of parts is becoming more evident. They're starting to stock more as more cars are being sold. So there's more parts available. So yeah, so we're seeing the transition. It's just going to become normal, mainstream, I believe, in the next couple of years. But like I said, that's why I said collision repair facilities, technicians need to be properly trained. They might not be seeing them right now. They might see one or two or get a call about one or two of them, but they'll be coming. And when they do come, it's just, they'll know how to handle those vehicles.
And And as we talked yesterday, people love their EVs. So if you, as an insurer, have a policyholder with somebody in an accident, they want their car back
Mhm.
and done right, of course. But the other thing that to consider is just the availability of a replacement vehicle. You end up totaling that person's vehicle. They may not get one for another year if they have to
Right.
wait that long. And that's the balancing act that has always existed within the industry. And I agree with David. As more technicians, more collision shops sort of understand the processes and become educated on, it creates more capacity to actually have those vehicles fixed, more demand for the parts, and it's those positive cycles that we all win when we play at that level.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Just education across the board. And we've got a couple of questions here on this topic. First question, if either of you know this, are total loss full electric vehicles being exported out of North America?
Definitely, yes, definitely. A lot of them are going to Europe. There's different standards in other countries. Labor rates are a lot lower in some cases. I see a lot of cars that were going out to Russia. They're going out to Germany, Lebanon. I'm trying to think of some of we in the early days when we first started AllEV, I had a lot of contacts that would contact us looking for these cars. They were looking at buying these cars. They want to export them. Didn't matter the damage on the vehicles. I think in most cases they were trying to put the cars back on the road, not so much salvage the parts out of them and use them for other purposes like the batteries for power storage and stuff like that. They're buying many of these vehicles and piecing them together. And as one of the things that was noted was that the cars are very sophisticated. So so swapping parts back and forth without calibration procedures, OE processes, as well as information and software, makes it very, very difficult. But yeah, in the early days, definitely we still saw a lot of these were being exported across the ocean. But now I think more of them are staying here. I think more people are grabbing them. The pricing, the transport was a big issue with the shipping and all the issues with shipping. So I think a lot more are staying here now, but once again, yeah, it was a big concern in the beginning. We did see a lot of them being, especially on the auction sites, you can actually see where people are bidding from. And it was pretty impressive of, some of the countries where the people are bidding on these cars and how much they're paying for them too. So,
And ICBC did a study out in BC, and because it's one sure, they can kind of understand what's happening to their salvage. And up to 40% of their salvage is being exported out of the country. And a lot of that's even branded irreparable, but the host, whoever's receiving that vehicle, doesn't care, and that's sort of the discussion. There is even discussion at the federal level about keeping those vehicles here because those are critical materials that our economy needs. And it doesn't make any sense whatsoever to export an asset and a resource like that. So, like all high-end vehicles, and electric vehicles tend to be high-end, there's a lot of exporting going on. And while that pads the auction's returns and the insurer's returns, when there's no parts available to fix those vehicles, that's the downward spiral of more total loss vehicles and much more unhappy policyholders.
yeah.
And Steve, I have a question here for you that came through the Q&A. I think we'll target this one now just because it's interesting on the topic of batteries. But Peter Porteous wants to know if can we discuss the reality of electric battery repurposing for storage versus truly recycling that battery for components?
Right. And so that's right now we're dealing at the level of reusing a battery in another automotive situation. And as David mentioned, a lot of academic, a lot of research, a lot of kind of garage lab sort of research on the repurposing is what they call it. So second life. So taking that battery and using it for some sort of energy storage. It could be microgrid, could be your cottage, could be a small application, a plant, store. Thousands of tests going on around the world, usually by the OEMs themselves, trying to just figure out the economics of it all. Whether they would actually be used for direct electricity grid still remains to be seen. price of new batteries specifically built for energy storage is coming down, and there's the risk associated with use. Generally, a used battery is no longer functional in another vehicle when it reaches about 80% of its stored capacity. But that 80% can easily drive those microgrid situations. Some of the really interesting stuff, though, is happening out of David's province, Dalhousie. Jeff Dawn, the researcher there, the so-called million-mile battery is probably is with us now, and it's going to be more and more like that. So the battery's got 1,000,000 miles, or 1.6 million kilometers. The vehicle itself may only be a 200, 300K vehicle in terms of its body and the infrastructure of it all. So that battery is going to outlast the car by 20 to 30 years. And they're looking at it specifically for storage, for bidirectional charging on the grid. So that second life is seen by a lot of very smart, well-financed people, organizations, as the way to really extract value out of this battery revolution that's upon us. And that's where it puts us sort of right in the crosshairs of, we will be eventually generating a lot of these batteries, and the supply and demand need to kind of balance themselves out. So it is a big opportunity, but as we say, hey kids, don't play around with them. It's not a toy to play in your backyard to see if you can take them apart. And right now, the technology, we're not looking to open up a battery to see what's inside, but there are companies doing that, and there are companies developing the software to plug into a battery to determine state of health and which batteries need to be replaced to bring that back up into a 90, 95%, even 100% sort of value proposition again. So it's a big area, and it's a brand new area for us and a lot of other people.
Yeah, and like Steve's saying, just on the recycler side with the batteries coming in for storage, and that's true, even a battery at 70% state of health still has a second purpose for storage capacity. It might not drive the car the distance anymore, but definitely would have the storage capacity to power a house, or is that for a day or two. So they're using it as extra storage. I actually help with supplying batteries to the RESL lab at Dalhousie University. That's a renewable energy storage lab. That's Dr. Lucas Swan that runs that lab, and they're constantly testing batteries. And as a recycler, if you start bringing these vehicles in and you start saving them, the big thing with these batteries is there's something called cycle time on them. And cycle time is how many times they charge and discharge, just like your phone does. A typical cell phone is only good for about 150 cycles, maybe about 200 cycles. That means your cell phone will last about 3 to 4 years at most before the battery gets to a point that's just not usable. Electric vehicle technology and the batteries are very different technology in their batteries. They're not the same as the battery that's in your cell phone. Even though they're lithium-ion batteries, they're different types of materials, different processes. These batteries are easily up to about 1,500 to 2,500 cycles. That means a car that gets in around 500-kilometer range on a charge, if it can, go that 500 kilometers times by 2,500 cycles, you're talking about batteries that will get over 800,000 kilometers. The batteries will outlast these cars. And as Steve was mentioning with Jeff Dunn on the million-mile battery, it is possible. It's definitely possible. I do state of health batteries on hundreds of vehicles. We actually have a software program that I developed for doing it. And I'm seeing cars, it's incredible. I just did a 2019 Ioniq that was still at like 96.7% state of health with 50,000 kilometers on it. So, so the battery is lasting longer, better than, I think it's even better than what they anticipated the battery degradation would be. So we're seeing more and more, more value in these batteries. And, at the right time when these batteries become reusable or second life or, recycled, there's a lot of value there, and keeping them in Canada is very important. I agree with Steve, exporting these things overseas when they're already here makes no sense, and they should be here for the products that the cars offer, as well as the components within the modules, batteries, the motors, and all these other rare materials that are already here in Canada.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Just so much information with the batteries alone. And like you said at the beginning of our conversation on this topic there, David, you could talk about the write-offs and all the implications of what these parts mean and where they're going all day. Like we could host so many sessions on this. But it all boils down to education, which has been the underlying theme of this entire session. But we actually got a question here from Craig here in the chat at the perfect time. So starting with David, where can collision repairers look to seek EV education? We actually had a question from Andy Latham here earlier in the chat too, asking what percentage of automotive technicians are EV certified? And do you anticipate whether there will be enough or not in the future? So just looking for your thoughts on that.
Sure. It's funny because I actually was in Gatineau, Quebec in 2012 and I was presenting on electric vehicles. It was really early. It was all around electrification with EV technicians. Will there be a supplement to the programs offered through apprenticeship? Currently, apprenticeship in level 4 offers EV training, but it's mostly around safety, identification, so on. The industry is still pretty new. I actually helped write the curriculum in Nova Scotia with the Nova Scotia Apprenticeship Agency for electric vehicle training. Right now, there is no designation as EV technicians in Canada. It's not a designation right now, but I think definitely as a supplement, it'll start showing up more and more. The biggest thing is, where do you get the training from? Right now, OEs are pretty much tied dear to their heart, their EV training. So unless you're with an OE dealer, it's very difficult to get some of this training. Like I said, I'm dealing with many community colleges right now, right across Canada. They're being very proactive. I think there's going to be a lot of industry is going to be coming out with the aftermarket on EV awareness, EV safety, EV maintenance, EV repair, right across the board. It's just we're pioneers. We're seeing the beginnings of what's coming, and it's going to be no different than any other system. You'll need the training, you'll need the equipment, you'll need the information. But right now, it's hard. It is really hard to get that information. It's hard to get the training to do it. It's expensive. There's places in the US that do it. I've been down to several different places in Massachusetts, in California, and done training down there. I've done some clinics down there, but even conversion clinics we've been part of. And even at that point, it's still not 100%, but I think in Canada, the BCIT has an EV maintenance program, which looks pretty good. They've been running it now for a couple of years. I know other colleges that are starting to implement it. They're very excited, which is really interesting because colleges have always been seen behind the ball. Like, they do apprenticeship training. They get, they don't seem to be up to speed on technology. They always seem to be a few years behind. I've been talking to deans. I've been talking to some of the presidents of these colleges, and being in the college system myself, they want to be the leader in this. They want to be the ones to be able to give the industry this training, to be able to be the experts in this area. So it's really exciting to see that the colleges are coming on, the education systems are coming on to be the proactive people. And maybe industry might be a little bit behind. I don't know, like organizations like ICAR, they offer electric vehicle training, but I think what it comes really down to it is the hands-on. Everybody always says that, and to have the experience with electric vehicles and to be able to teach them the fundamentals are there, that's great. Safety's great, but when it comes down to the nuts and bolts of it, they want technicians want to be able to see, feel, do these types of things, like high voltage installation testing high voltage system disconnects. All these things are all part of what they're looking for in training. So so it's coming. You just have to watch for it. Contacting local community colleges, local governments, any of that stuff is very, very critical. And just think, first responders, they're all crying for the same type of training because it's all around safety. So training is a big topic right now. It's really big as it's starting to grow, the amount of cars on the road.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I know, like you mentioned, ICAR offers a couple EV courses, but I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe that they're mostly online. Where's the hands-on stuff? And it's just the rise of things. And I know that there are a lot of individuals like yourself that are experts in EVs trying to kind of, teach what they know, but we are lacking a framework there for the overall when it does come. Sorry, go ahead if there was a comment there. But Steve, we've got a couple more questions here, so we will get to them all. I promise. We might be here a couple minutes after 3, but if we don't get to your question, we will send you contact information that you can always reach out to Steve or Dave. Steve here, I know that there's a lot of movement, conversations going on with auto recyclers and this electric vehicle conundrum and electrification. There's an article in Canadian Auto Recyclers talking all about all of the initiatives that are ongoing, but could you just let us into a little bit of the conversations that are happening and how auto recyclers are working towards chipping away at getting an understanding of the topic?
Yeah, our focus on the training piece, just to add on to what David was talking about, is really on that safe removal of it all. And so, the OEMs always do a great job in creating manuals for first responders. But, flipping a 175-page PDF to your tech so he stays safe is not going to cut it. So people are kind of working through those manuals and getting rid of the stuff that we don't need to know about, but what needs to actually happen. So there are some training initiatives. BC has been just way out in front of everybody in terms of their training of auto recyclers, of towing, of collision repair, done in a virtual way, but different levels of it all, and some certification and kind of testing around all of that. Our colleagues down in the US, the Automotive Recyclers Association, have got guidebooks, and they too have converted some of that into virtual training. And somebody who's on this webinar listening in, Andy Latham from the UK, we had Andy over here about 3 years ago and had about 60 of our member employees trained. And Andy's working on a global training certification initiative just to kind of make sure that everybody's working off of the same information, sharing the good information that's out there. And so we're trying to find that right balance between virtual training, because it's easy to deploy. Canada's a big country, but at the same time, as David said, hands-on is really going to be required. It's going to make those techs feel more comfortable in touching the car versus seeing it happen in video on a computer. Great, but I think we have some work to do in terms of that side of it. And then there's the whole economics of the vehicle. How do you value it? How do you understand what different channels are about? And that's where the industry associations take over at the higher levels, talking to other industries, the manufacturers themselves, about our joint interest and responsibility in making sure that this works. Everybody in the supply chain, wants people into an EV. And they don't want people to, don't buy an EV. It's, the battery is going to end up in landfill. They're horrible, and cobalt and Congo. And it's like, there's a lot of R&D, a lot of dollars, a lot of very bright people working on this. And again, we're just trying to hold up our hand and say, talk to us. We have that on the ground knowledge. We're touching them now. We know where there are gaps. We know where we need information or access to just sort of make those gaps as small as possible so that we truly have a circular economy in these vehicles. So just, again, trying to talk to anybody and everyone that we can. We've got our convention coming up the end of next month in Toronto, and I think we got a panel on there, who's buying and who's selling batteries. Just trying to be as hands-on and real world as we possibly can, and just want to share that with as many people who want to listen.
Yeah, absolutely. So those are all the questions that I had, but like I said, we've got lots of people we're going to go in the Q&A. So just to start with this one, Steve, I know this is a conversation we've had privately. We've got a lot of people, manufacturers and certain recycling centers, Stelco to name one, dipping their toes into the sector and kind of saying, oh, we're going to recycle batteries. Do you see, or do you predict that they'll try to partner with OEMs or manufacturers to try and do this? Or what are kind of your opinions, high level on that?
Everybody's attacking this from a collaborative perspective. Like, nobody has got the singular issue or answer to all of this. So the OEMs, need steel. So yeah, we've seen those sort of announcements. There are a lot of sort of just new players, the mining companies that are figuring out, oh, in order to augment my mining capabilities, I need to be able to recycle these batteries because some of these materials are very hard to find and very expensive to get. So they're kind of growing from a mining perspective into the recycling side, into the building the batteries. And they want to know, what we're generating. And then there's a lot of battery companies. They might be in the lead acid battery business, or they might be just sort of in that chemical business, who are kind of flipping a bit and trying to enter. Um, you got to watch the announcements. It's really easy to issue a press release saying we're going to do this, but it's like you probably should have done that 3 or 4 years ago. You're way behind the volume of dollars that are ahead of you. Global players that are partnering. So Redwood, which we always consider to be a division of Tesla, it's a separate company from Tesla, but it's one of the co-founders started Redwood as a battery recycling play who's getting into the battery building business. And they just announced in California that they're partnering with Volvo and Ford to create an end-of-life battery ecosystem that they want to share with everybody. That's being driven by government regulations, or the threat of regulations, that, if you guys don't get your heads around this problem and convert it into an opportunity, we will come forth and put in regulations you won't like. So that's getting the OEs, it's getting all these players to kind of step forward and say, if we don't do something, some problems will happen. So let's start talking and let's start integrating that way. But it is the new actors into the field that it's a godsend for an association, because I get to tell them about the industry and, love doing that. But you can always see them wrapping their heads around, I thought those were just junkyards. It's like, no, progressive people who play with a lot of data, and you better get into the game, or there's other people who are kind of waiting to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's the players here. So it seems like it's going to be very, recyclers have been on this for, like you said, the last 3-4 years. A lot of these people are just kind of jumping on ship now. So it is definitely going to be interesting how it plays out. Going back to kind of the repair side of things, we did have a question during the write-off portion talking about batteries and whatnot. Will the insurance company be buying the batteries for fixing cars in the body shop? So in the event a battery did get damaged, would the insurer be required to purchase a battery, or would you foresee a situation where they would just write that vehicle off?
Yeah, typically a battery that's been damaged, even like by millimeters, a scrape on the bottom of a battery case can create the vehicle to lose its warranty on that battery. Tesla has very strict guidelines around those things. So at the end of the day, the car, one, could lose its warranty. Car, drives off a curb, hits a rock, and the battery's damaged. No damage to the body of the car, but the battery's now a total loss based on the warranty on the vehicle. So what happens is I think the recycling part will become more so on that side of it, because with the battery compromised, will the insurance company buy the battery back? At that point, they probably just total loss the vehicle. It'd probably be easier for them to do that. A recycler would be, more warranty. That's a great vehicle. It's like it's undercarriage damage, batteries damage, but it goes to the cost, and that's where I seen the auctions. The cars are cars, doors, windows, glass, fenders, all these wonderful parts that can be reused in an auto collision center or whatnot. But the battery itself is the biggest cost that comes from these auctions. So if the recycler is bidding on a car, for example, like a Tesla at like $27,000 for a total loss salvage title vehicle, that looks great, majority of that cost is the battery. And if they don't have an avenue to get rid of that battery, you can't just leave lithium batteries sitting around, because one, they will deplete over time where they can, and the storage of the batteries becomes an issue. You have a couple batteries stacked on top of each other. One day, somebody's driving with the forklift and knocks over one of the batteries, and now the battery case is damaged. And then at that point, it's hard to resell that battery, and that's a huge investment. Like they're talking, some of these battery modules are $15,000-$20,000, especially with Teslas and so on. So it's an auto recycler, I can see, like catalytic converters on vehicles. You get a car in, they're bidding on a car, they know it's like a Toyota Prius, they know the value of the converters is this on that vehicle. It doesn't matter how badly damaged the vehicle is, they already know what their investment is going to be on just some of those basic components. car comes in, the converters are instantly removed and sent for recycling, and the rest of the car can sit in the yard for who knows how long. And same as an electric vehicle, the car comes in, gets processed, battery gets removed, might go out to a recycler, might go out to education facility, might go to a research facility, may go to a recycler to get processed, but then the car can sit out in the yard, and it doesn't really matter how long that car sits there, because it's it's just regular body parts and whatnot. So I think that's what's happening. A lot of these cars are just really high priced. The insurance companies love it because they're getting a lot of their money back on them, and that's why I think when they go and they're being sold overseas, and that's why they don't care. Like the auctions, they don't care who's going to buy them. They just see the higher dollar value on these vehicles. So which is, so that's kind of that's what I see is happening with the industry, is that, I don't think the insurance companies will buy the batteries back, but I think there needs to be avenues for the recyclers to be able to say, hey, I got a car here, damaged battery. We're not going to do anything with it. What's it worth? And right away they can process it, take it out, and then have it sent to a facility or whatnot to have it recycled in a way that, battery may never be used again. And that's fine, because the materials in it, like the nickel, graphite, lithium, all that can be all reprocessed. So.
And David had introduced a concept earlier about cycles. So traditionally we use kilometers driven as a metric for the quality of the engine transmission, even the body panels. But now it's much more relevant to look at the cycles left in it all. And there are a lot of companies who are looking at the technology to figure out that state of health. Spears Technology was thought to be one of the leaders in terms of taking batteries from all over, figuring out where they go, reuse, recycling. Well, they were bought by Cox Automotive for their auction division to figure out, how do I determine the state of health of that battery, because it's going to drive a higher bid. So if I can report, it's only had 132 cycles, it's still got this left in it all, that will generate more of a return on it all. And I think that we need to start to figure out how to adopt that, how many cycles into our evaluation of the quality of the product.
As a key performance indicator kind of idea.
I'm going to tell you, you should watch next week. I'm actually doing a video next week on battery health. We have a system that we use that to measure. I can tell you the DCFCs the batteries had, the AC charging, the amount regen, the cycle times on the battery. I can tell the remaining capacity of the battery. So we use this a lot with our vehicles. So in fact, in a lot of the provinces, I offer rebates that you must be able to provide a state of health of the battery before the vehicle is sold. In fact, even Carfax has contacted me about adding the state of health to the Carfax report. So, and you're right, Steve, it's like the state of health is really like the kilometers on that engine. If I only have 300 cycles on a battery that's predicted to have a great, 2,500 cycle lifetime, that becomes a higher value to somebody, maybe looking for a battery for whatever purpose than a battery that has, 2,000 cycles already on it. So these are the things that we're going to start seeing in the next little bit, especially with the batteries themselves. The batteries, cycle time is that, the battery health is really like a compression check on an engine. So, so we're going to see more demand for information on the batteries themselves and what they do. And like I said, if you watch our AllEV website, I have a section there on videos, and actually we're doing one on battery health reports and what they mean and what they display. And then I actually do a couple of vehicles right there in the video to show what the reporting looks like. So, and it's custom software. It's not hard, but it is a bit of a science still. So.
Yeah. Absolutely. So everyone can check out David's videos, has them on YouTube as well under AllEV Canada. They're on his website as well. And we've got the Canadian Auto Recyclers annual edition of the magazine coming out. It's going off to the printers today, so you should see it in the next week or so in your mailboxes. We've got lots of discussion on electric vehicles on that. I won't take up too much more of your time, guys. I have to say thank you so much for this fantastic session. We will have to do this again sometime. We had so much great discussion, and just can't thank you enough for being part of this.
Great.
Hey, thanks. It was a great,
thank you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in,
Thank
and we'll see you next time. All right, have a good one, Steve and Dave.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.